Thanks very much. Welcome. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
So, first of all, just how did you two get together? How did this happen?
Yeah, not very common. So I think it was just mentioned, but I am a neuroscientist, and in my lab, I study the brain's attention system. So how it is that we are able to focus, notice, and we all know this is such a powerful system. But what we learned over the course of our work is that it's also extremely vulnerable. And the three main vulnerabilities are stress, poor mood, and threat. So after understanding this, I wanted to see if there was a solution we could offer people for whom the professional life cycle couldn't escape these aspects of the common human experience. So I, along with my colleague Liz Stanley at Georgetown University, wrote a series of grants together and had the funding in hand from the DoD to offer mindfulness training to active duty military. And it took us an entire year, but finally we found an enlightened military leader who was willing to take this project.
So, Walt, how did this come across your desk?
Well, we were deploying and redeploying since 9/11 every other year. So we were on the every other year program. I get back from a deployment. I'd already have my date for the next deployment. I knew when I was going.
You were out of Fort Drum.
At that time, we were at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. It was at the 25th Infantry Division. And we were coming back from Iraq, and we were having to work on our reintegration. So we just knew at this time, after about 8 years of deployments, that our reintegration training just wasn't working. We come back and we overload the soldiers with a bunch of information. Don't abuse alcohol, don't abuse substance, don't go home and beat your spouse, don't buy a motorcycle and drive at 1,000 miles an hour. And all these things we would tell them not to do, they would end up doing. And so we really wanted something that would be different, because we just realized if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, it wasn't very smart. And then a colonel friend of mine, Dr. Brumich, we were colleagues in Hawaii, he introduced me to Dr. Stanley from Georgetown, Amishi Jha. So we were really focused on the post-deployment reintegration training. But we heard them out. They come in, and in 5 minutes, they described me perfectly. Someone who was doing things, not being in the moment, multitasking, just running extremely fast, always at a high sprint, never slowing yourself down. So we were worried about our soldiers, but I knew right then that this was really something we needed pre-deployment, this could benefit soldiers. They described me. And so we wanted to then bring that into our experiment and our study for soldiers. They chose 200 soldiers. It was the largest we could do. I didn't make the cut. I'm in charge of the brigade, and I don't make the cut. Amishi and Liz didn't, something about me, I guess, they didn't want me in there. So I had to self-teach myself. I'm like, this is really good. And just the first couple practices of trying to do the right thing, am I doing the right thing? But I noticed, I could go home at night and actually listen to my wife. And she was surprised. and play ball with my son without checking my BlackBerry. Anybody remember those? And without, he'd say, Dad, you're not here. And Cynthia used to say things to me all the time. I was very mindful of her, even before we knew what mindfulness was don't deploy until you deploy. Your every other year sounds hard, but the year you're back home, you're not really there. You're preparing for the next mission. You're racing. You're trying to do everything that you have to do, and many things need to be done. But you're not slowing down. You're not in the moment. You're not with your family. And I knew that this could benefit our soldiers. Really for just how to deal with the stress of combat, how to be in the moment in the most complex, crazy environments you'd ever be in, but also how to come back home and slow down and be with your family. I just immediately knew this was beneficial and we were onto something. And the science that Amishi explained right away, and my undergrad was in biology and chemistry, and this was compelling. We had a lot of information out there in the military, a lot of things, a lot of services available, but nobody could show any data like, hey, this is really...
So this wasn't just about, because when I first heard about this, I assumed this was just, for people struggling with PTSD on return or trying to avoid issues upon return. You were really hoping, and you signed on for people pre-deployment and even in the field. Is that right?
It is. I think we learned right away that we had a lot of services in the military for post-traumatic stress disorder, but everybody suffers from post-traumatic stress, everyone. But not everyone was spiraling into disorder. Well, why was that? Some soldiers were experiencing growth, some weren't, but it was really by chance. So what could we do pre-traumatic experience that would help us with the post-traumatic experience? And that's what caught my attention first, and that's what got me into this, but it actually opened the door to so much more not to just be able to regulate so that we could get through the trauma experience and then come out of it without spiraling into disorder, but actually maybe not create maybe be in control during this traumatic event, maybe be able to grow from that experience and help others grow so that we could go to these very high stressful environments and be in the moment and see things for what they really are and not what we were perceiving.
And I think this has, value for anybody here. Obviously, most folks in this room are not in the military. But I just notice when I'm on trips for work or even on vacation, I'm always thinking about the next place I'm going or what's coming down the pike as opposed to where I actually am. It's only in retrospect when I've come home, I think about, oh, that was really cool to be in Rwanda, and that was really interesting, and oh yeah, I remember I saw all those things, and I look at the pictures of the things, and I say, oh yeah, I saw those mountain gorillas, but at the time, I was often thinking about something else. So how did you approach this?
So as you mentioned, I'm not a clinician, I'm a neuroscientist, so it really was from this cognitive training point of view. So how might we be able to provide training that would help people notice their environment, focus more clearly, and also become what we call meta-aware. So that it's not just that you're noticing what's happening, but you have an internal ability to get clarity on your own biases and habits of mind to better operate in complex circumstances. And one of the things that really surprised us, actually, in some of this early work, is that it's not so much that it's the fog of war that causes the problems alone. We know that's going to be problematic. But even the preparation period, the pre-deployment interval itself, and the demand and intensity of that degrades attention, makes mood poorer. And as you mentioned, this is obviously the most kind of poignant example we can think about is pre-deployment soldiers, but we've found this pattern in undergrads going through the semester, medical and nursing students. Just the pressures, ongoing, protracted pressures diminish these capacities. And then you've got to perform, right? So pre-deployment training degrades you, then you've got to go be deployed. So we really wanted to be protective against that if we could.
And so how do you go about instituting something that actually works?
Well, the study was in 2010, it's 2018, so we're not doing a very good job. I give myself a failing grade at integrating across the Army, but we tried it right away and we could see the benefits. In the military, we understand the benefits of physical fitness. We do it every day. We dedicate hours of day just for it. It's required to do. And we know when you're going to deploy to Afghanistan, you have to be at your top physical shape. It's a demanding terrain, any combat deployment, but it's part of the military. What we didn't have is anything that would train our brain to get the mental fitness. We were always treating it like it was a medical concern or behavioral health, and when we would deploy, we would try to enhance our ability through technology. So what I wanted to do was be able to train our brain so we could have the mental fitness to be able to be aware, to be in the moment, because it is our most important system of a soldier. We call soldiers our systems, and we have a lot of things that help us, communications, we have a lot of enablers to assist us, but it starts really with that mental awareness to know where you are, to be able to read a very complex environment where the enemy does not stand out. They don't wear a uniform until they take action, and your inability to be able to see the environment and discern correctly could cause the absolute opposite effect you're sent there to do, and then you spiral into these, we call them collateral damage, but you're actually conducting mission failure because you're not able to find the enemy. Everything starts to look like an enemy. Soldiers start to dehumanize the very population that we're there to help, and then we're not effective. We lose our military effectiveness because our minds are not working and they're not where we need them to be. So we think this has to be part of our pre-training, but part of our everyday lives within the military to enhance our awareness to be able to do our jobs better.
But another part to answer your question was it's a puzzle, right? So we have all of this civilian literature, thanks to pioneers like Jon Kabat-Zinn, that suggests that a program that's something like 40 hours over 8 weeks that provides the fundamental core practices involving mindfulness can be beneficial. But to take something like that and now translate it to a military environment where people aren't coming to it because they have chronic pain or some other aspect of their life experience that says, I want to try something different, right? So that was the first set of grants that we wanted to establish, is just how can you translate this in a way that would be accessible, relatable, and give people sort of hip pocket skills that they could take with them when they were deployed. And that's what we pursued. We figured out a way to kind of systematically go from something like 40 hours to 24 to 16 to 8 to even 4 hours of formal training. And then we wanted to see what's the sweet spot, what's the amount of time that people will tolerate participating in a program, meaning that they have the schedule to do it in these time pressures.
Well, also just sort of culturally,
oh yeah,
that's got to be an issue. I can't imagine you like deploying with little chimes, you know, like John Kabat-Zinn uses to start out a meditation. That's probably not in like the Go kit.
No.
No.
No, but Dan Harris did call me Colonel Moonbeam, I think, at one point. And he said, what do your soldiers think about it? But like any top performer, any athlete, if something's going to enhance your performance and make you better and let you be in a moment, and soldiers are warrior athletes, when they see that change, when they see that benefit, they just want more, and they want more. So it's not, if soldiers get a lot of things thrown on their plate, we get a lot of assistance, some things aren't working or not, but this is something that does work, and I think initially, just a few practices, you start to see the benefits, and once a soldier starts to see a benefit and knows that, hey, my job is I have to be clear in very complex environments, and these complex environments can be very deadly, and I have to make a decision in a split second. I need to be in that moment. I can't be somewhere else. I can't be allowing to replace that moment with something else to make me feel better. I got to be there.
Well, also, I mean, I'm fascinated to know how this helps with dealing with adrenaline, because I mean, the few times I've been in a kinetic environment, in a combat zone, or I was attacked in Egypt and by a mob for quite a while, having never been punched in the head until then, like when you first get punched in the head, you get quite a reaction, and the adrenaline starts pumping in your body, and you're no longer thinking straight. You're no longer in the moment. In fact, I was being attacked by a mob, and I thought I was saying in Arabic, calm down, to people. What I was actually saying was inshallah, which is God willing. So I'm being punched by a mob, and I'm like, God willing, God willing. And it was only when I looked at the videotape later, because I was videotaping it, thinking if I was going to get killed, I at least wanted to get a story out of it, that I noticed, like, why am I saying inshallah? This is like, God, I'm an idiot. But I mean, that's something can mindfulness work in sort of calming the body in that moment?
I mean, I think that it really is around the re-regulation aspect. So that's one part of it, is that the fight or flight freeze kind of anticipatory or present moment experiences you have are going to happen. But what kind of support and container can you hold around that? And how can you have leadership that'll help? So before we actually, we worked with General Piatt's group, we had done a small pilot study with a group of Marines who were deployed to Iraq, and the leadership was in the training with the rest of the group. And I remember one of the leaders, Captain Jeff Davis, saying to me, I knew we had a bad episode happen the day before. It was the day of the Iraqi elections. I'm not sending them out today. They're going to react. So there's an aspect of this that is about the planful anticipation, the management, and then the re-regulation after something quite difficult and problematic can happen.
So this was 2010. What would you like to see in the ideal world in the military? How would you like to see this incorporated?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many examples that I have from combat deployments. I would like to see this at the entry level, at our level. I'd like to see this in our daily practice. We do physical fitness, as I mentioned, every day. We even have a physical fitness uniform. We call it PT, physical training, and it leads the day. We start the day with it. Why not start your physical training or end your physical training with a practice? Because our mental fitness should be just as important and should be practiced with that same discipline. So some of the work that Amishi's been doing is, how do we incorporate it? Time is the biggest thing we just can't give up. That has been our hardest barrier to break through in the military, to get soldiers to dedicate time or to get commands to dedicate time. So we've done study after study and allowing the science then now to convince the military senior leadership that this is something. We don't have to spend $1 billion on latest technology. It's right here. We can do this, and our soldiers deserve it. So entry level, but also as we go through our professional military education to increase it, because if we're going to fight and win our nation's wars, it's got to end with peace. If we're going to win the peace, we have to have the strategy of how do wars transition to peace. They don't end in peace. That's the one thing I've learned. The war never ends in peace. You can't just go there, kill the enemy, and the next thing you know, it's there. And democracies aren't created by simply elections. There's so much process has to go on to incorporate this then into our deep strategic thinking of how are we able to assist in global national security issues and build the peace in these post-conflict areas, because it's so devastating. I mean, you know, with places you've been, the population in Mosul, Iraq, which I just came back from this summer, I mean, they're devastated. ISIS tried to wipe out an entire culture. There was an evil enemy that had to be attacked. I mean, they weren't going to give ground. But post-Mosul now is more important. Winning the peace is just as important, and it's even harder. And it requires now competing agendas, corruption. It wasn't a singular focused enemy that brought the nation of Iraq together. Now, post-conflict, everybody is struggling with how to win the peace after they've just won a devastating fight, but they really deserve a chance at peace. So I really believe this is not just individual. I think if you're going to help win a peace, you got to start with yourself, of course. And I think it's a necessary part of our military education that we need to bring to our daily lives in the military.
I'm guessing that some of the pushback you both must have received is the fear that this takes a soldier or Marine off point, that it takes them, it takes them out of the mental space that they need to be in order to, walk on patrol and be ready to shoot somebody, and it takes them, it seems incongruous with what the mission often calls for. And you hear that in the corporate world here, that, oh, well, mindfulness, it's great to be all friendly and be in the moment and thinking about compassion and stuff, but I want somebody who's a killer in the boardroom and can make things happen.
Right, and this is the solution to this is getting to the essence of what we're actually cultivating with mindfulness training and where the messaging comes in. So the program that we've developed at the University of Miami is something we call mindfulness-based attention training, MBAT, which has sort of a tough name. But the kinds of...
You had to give her a tough acronym for the military?
Yes, frankly, but it actually is about being mentally tough. So some of the themes in this program are things like zero the mind. Soldiers understand to get clarity before they shoot a weapon, they need to have it precisely calibrated. The mind needs the same thing. Or shoot, don't shoot. I mean, these are the kinds of drills that they get. But what we've learned through our research is actually one of the bigger problems of friendly fire instances of killing friend versus foe is a devastation that soldiers have to live with for their lives. And if they can get a sense of how to best make their performance accurate, that's a power that they really value. And one last thing I'll say is that, our first paper, we called it Minds at Attention, because soldiers know how to stand at attention, but knowing the nature of the mind, that 50% of our waking moments, our mind is wandering away from the present moment. And even as you're standing there, where is your mind? Is your mind at attention? And that we can give you tools to help cultivate it. So if you are patrolling, or if you are watch standing, you're going to be able to have full access to your own attention to do the job better.
Because that is the thing. I mean, you go on patrol in Helmand Province or Paktia, and it's the same thing day after day. You're often going down the same road, and it's hours and hours of boredom, and kinetic activity happens, and it happens very quickly and for short bursts, and maybe it doesn't happen for days and days and days.
Now, those sheer moments of terror and the horrific episodes, you need to be in that moment. I would say it actually puts you on point. Many instances in Paktika province, actually, we were at a mountain, high altitude operation to take down a very senior foreign fighter camp, and we'd done this 2 or 3 months in a row now, and we've been very successful. We had the enemy really responding to us, and we found another encampment. We went up that mountain at 11,000 feet. I mean, it's hard to isolate that camp and surround it. And I had authority already because the intelligence was perfect. That we could use lethal force, we could bomb it if we needed to. We went up that mountain, we isolated that camp, it started to snow. We had all the advantages on our side, and we seemed to really just get them by surprise. and our scouts were in position, and one man, we saw what we thought was a foreign fighter walking around the camp as a sentry, and we were ready to go. It was game on. I mean, you're there, you're in the moment, you're checking everything off. It's like, I got everything where I need it to be. I'm ready to give the execute order where we would seize the camp and probably kill those in there or capture those that didn't resist. And then the one scout, young soldier, came on and he said, "Sir, I see this man, but he doesn't have a weapon." That call, I'll never forget that call, because we all saw this objective as we've seen every other objective. And he saw the same thing we all saw, but yet he saw something different. He saw no weapon. So we didn't have positive identification at that time, but it wasn't a rules of engagement at this point. It was we didn't know what we had. And then the sergeant comes on the line too. When I've been on many combat operations with him, he's our best soldier. He said, "Sir, I think we could just tackle this guy. Why don't we just go up and just grab these two guys?" And we did, and it was game on. So we rushed the tent thinking at this point they'd be awakened by the startles outside and come out ready to fight us, and we had to be ready to engage. And out of the front flap of the tent came this rather large and very angry woman with no weapon. And she was mad at why this guy was up in this mountain and had her two of her men, or part of her tribe, on the ground. What we realized, this wasn't an enemy encampment. This wasn't a foreign fighter. This was a nomadic tribe that had crossed these mountains for hundreds of years to find pastures in Afghanistan from Pakistan. But everything looked the same. The intelligence was perfect, but it wasn't the same. And to be able to discern in that moment, I have hundreds of stories of this every day in combat where you're asked to be in a sea of people like this, and somebody in there is trying to kill you. You need to be there. You can't be anywhere else. There's nothing happy about someone trying to kill you. You need to be on point for that moment to know when to use lethal force, but more importantly, when not to. I had a very dangerous grenade, an armored penetrating grenade thrown at me, and I don't know if I told my wife this story, so please shut your ears, honey. But, and it was thrown, I was walking through a town in Iraq, and it was thrown at us from a car. Fortunately, it landed right on the concrete, but it landed about 3 feet from me, and the blast went into the ground. Smoke was everywhere. The mayor of the small town was walking. It was months before, or a couple weeks before the elections. And the smoke cleared. We saw the car fleeing, and the soldier didn't shoot. He froze. Now, had he shot, he probably would have killed some civilians. But that wasn't in his mind. He really froze. And as I picked the mayor up to be able to stay calm in these moments, I just remember telling him, "Well, I don't think they want you to run for re-election in this town," is all I could think of saying to the guy. But, it was like, but you have to be, at those moments, you have to be at your clearest. Because you could bring the most harmful action that works against the strategic purpose we're trying to achieve, and that's peace in a very violent, torn nation. But also, you don't want to take lives incorrectly. You don't want to take a life, period. But if you have to, you want to make sure you can do it with surgical precision, and to do that, you have to be on point. You have to be in that moment. And once we translated the language, I think I said to Amishi, "Don't tell them to chew on a raisin. Maybe tell them to put a dip of Copenhagen in their mouth or something to concentrate." That didn't go over very well. That didn't make the final cut. But we tried to translate it. We tried to translate it to something that the soldiers understood. So the zeroing of the weapon. To be clear, to block out everything else, when you're a marksman, you have to be able to see the target and be on point. To make sure you're hitting what you want to hit, or not shooting. It's very difficult. We used to train it by putting them in stressful environments and present targets to them. Shoot, don't shoot. But we didn't do anything for their mind to be able to discern when that adrenaline was up, to be able to regulate it and put it down where it needs to be.
And then I imagine even for once the mission is over, you're still in field, but once that mission is over, to come down from that, I mean, that's a difficult thing. You got to go out the next day and do it again, but you have 12 hours and you need to kind of try to return to another place.
Yeah, exactly. So it helps that you've regulated before, so you're not exploding every time you're in these moments. But to get back out, to get back on the road where you just had an IED. My vehicle blew up in Afghanistan, and the next day we had to get on that road. And the soldiers didn't want to do it. I mean, this is where, I was reported on Afghan TV or Pakistan TV that the commander was killed in Paktika province, and I don't think I told my wife that one either. But but it was, you had to get there, and I had to physically walk out to these spots on the road and say, "Come on, we have to go forward. It's not here. We got to be in that moment and be able to. We can't live in that past. We have to be in that moment." And that's what Amishi's work has really helped the Army do, to stay on play, not on fast forward or rewind, but to stay there where you are, and it's so necessary in these environments.
And I would just add that it's not just about coming back to base after going out on a mission, it's returning home. And what we've seen, even in our work with special operations forces, we trained special operators, and I was expecting after the training, they said they benefited from it. So I was asking for some examples, like, tell me how this impacts you. And I thought maybe I'd get some very exciting stories of what they could tell me from deployment, but it wasn't. It was, and I just remember one soldier saying, I could go to my daughter's ballet recital and watch her. And I could see the expression on her face. I see her growing up. I can see the joy and pride that I'm in the audience. So just being able to return back and actually be where they are, even upon return, is very powerful for them.
We're just out of time. Is there anything else just to leave the folks with that you want people to know?
I guess my main thing as a scientist is we need to follow the science. There are ways we can help train the mind to make it stronger and better able to deal with high-stress situations. We don't have to leave it to just whatever the person's disposition is, and that the science should be allowed to happen. It should be trusted and followed as we get more evidence.
Yeah, we live in this environment every day, and this is very helpful to our soldiers to be able to be in these complex environments and do the right thing, but then to also come home and be home with your families and grow. You don't have to become a horrible person because you've seen and perhaps done horrible things in combat. You can come home and transition. It's very helpful, but it's also helpful, I think, in the broader strategic context that the world is at conflict. And we're not winning the peace. And we need to look at this. This is what war is supposed to help us achieve, that we can achieve this peace. And my last deployment in Iraq, it was so important that I was able to sit and listen to people with completely different agendas, completely mistrusting and distrust of one another, that just survived this horrific attack of their nation from ISIS. But they won it. But yet they're losing the peace because they can't come together and sit. And this was very helpful now as a senior leader in the military to just be able to listen to each side and bring them together and try to build this trust so that they can enjoy the peace that they fought so hard to achieve.
Well, thank you both for what you're doing. It's extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you.